Hello, everybody. How am I sounding? Is this too loud? This is good? Okay, remember, we're just getting used to being back in this room, all this in-personness, which is so wonderful, but we're trying to make sure all of our equipment works right as well, so bear with us. Welcome to the Laurie Okuma Memorial Reading. I'm Megan Marshall, and I'm the director of the Hugh C. Hyde Living Writers Series. I'm excited we have a wonderful poet here with us this evening who's going to help to kick off this month's series of events. November is Native American Heritage Month, and thusly I'd like to acknowledge this space that we are privileged to share. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State University community, we acknowledge this legacy. I'd also like to take a moment to thank those who have helped to make this series possible, and that includes Markle Tumlin, my fabulous co-host in the back there, and our other friends from Love Library, including Danya Hall, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I also want to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature and Michael Ramirez and our friends from Aztec Shops who are selling books over there in the back. And tonight I want to issue a very, very special thanks to the Okuma family for the endowment that allows us to honor the memory of a very special SDSU MFA alumna, Laurie Matsueda Okuma, by featuring the work of a woman poet or prose writer. In addition to earning her MFA, Laurie also taught here at SDSU and was committed to bringing attention to women writers whose voices are often marginalized. So we're happy to celebrate her legacy tonight, along with her family's continued support. So how about a round of applause? And just a few final reminders, if you have not done so already, please silence your cell phones. You're not automatically on mute when you're in this room. And we are recording the event, but don't worry, all it sees is this area right here, so y'all are safe. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our featured reader. Angela Narciso Torres is the author of What Happens Is Neither, Blood Orange, which was the winner of the 2013 Willow Books Literature Award for poetry, and the chapbook To the Bone. Her recent work appears or is forthcoming in Poetry, Prairie Schooner, Harpur Palate, and Poetry Northwest. A graduate of Warren Wilson MFA Program for Writers and Harvard Graduate School of Education, Angela has received fellowships from Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Illinois Arts Council, and the Ragdale Foundation. She received the Yeats Poetry Prize from the W.B. Yeats Society of New York and was named one of Chicago's Lit 50 Who Really Books in Chicago by NewCity Magazine. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Manila, she currently resides in San Diego. And she's a senior and reviews editor for RHINO Poetry. In speaking on why we turn toward poetry, Angela states, poetry is transformative, its power metamorphic. Out of the meaninglessness of life-threatening illness, loss, and death, we create new sense, new narrative truths. Poetry makes meaning out of the inexplicable. I felt this description of poetry's power particularly apt and compelling because these are some of the very same reasons I turned toward Angela's poetry specifically. Her work is meditative, musical, metamorphic. It creates new narratives in which stone fruit becomes grief and sadness. Pearl diving is a search for rare, fleeting recollections, and folding laundry becomes a prayer. Through these evocative reimaginings, the act of elevating the seemingly mundane, we're invited to seek solace and to make sense of our shared humanity. Of Angela's work, poet Eleanor Wilner raves, in images drawn from nature and a pitch-perfect ear, her lines reach the profound sadness and beauty of human existence. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Angela Narciso Torres.
Thank you so much for that beautiful welcome. I am honored, and it's such a great privilege to be here reading in person with all of you. It's such a pleasure to see all your beautiful faces in the audience. I think this is only my third reading in person from this book, which came out early last year. And after countless Zoom readings, there's still nothing like being in person, in a room, hearing each other, seeing each other's smiles. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Sandra for inviting me to her class today, and for the students who were just the most amazing, attentive, deeply engaged, and the questions were, wow. I mean, they could be teaching the class on grief poetry. They just really engaged with the work so deeply. And I'm looking forward to meeting your students too after the class, after the reading. But really, it's such an honor to have been able to share my work with you through the text and now through this reading. Emerson said that it is the good reader that makes a good book, and it has been such a gift to see my poems reflected through your eyes. Today, I'll be reading mainly from What Happens Is Neither, which was published, as I said, early last year in the midst of the pandemic. The book is primarily an homage and an elegy to my parents, whom I lost within a couple weeks of each other in 2019. My mother to Alzheimer's and my father to cancer, and eventually to a broken heart. It is as much a book about grief and loss as it is about reinventing the self and finding one's way back into light, even as one mourns. Many of the poems I began writing in the last decade to process the gradual loss of my mother, who was struggling with a disease that eventually claimed her. One thing I realized after reading from the book over the past year and a half or so is that when I wrote it, it was a way of healing my grief over losing my parents, but I didn't know then that it was also what would carry me through the unexpected losses of the pandemic, which we all experienced. I see this book now as a way of processing not only my past griefs, but my future ones as well, and the present ones as well. And I'm hoping that this book will also be that companion for you, because as we all know, loss is the essential condition of being human. The structure of the book is circular, as the title implies. What happens is neither the end nor the beginning. And I'll start with that poem. What happens is neither the end nor the beginning, yet we're wired to look for signs. Consider the peonies. One makes a perfect bud after months of nothing. Another's leaves are ringed with black rot. How can I not think end? How can I not say beginning? Leaves fall when days shorten because the tree must reduce to its tough parts, twig, branch, bark. My mother sleeps away the daylight. She nods off while chewing a spoonful of fish and rice, her head a peony gone to seed. Father calls to say she doesn't recognize him. Turning to him, she cried out, certain a stranger was in her bed. He played his violin till she slept, a leaf in late fall curling into itself. In autumn, chlorophyll disappears, canceling green from leaves so yellow and magenta can blaze. In my mirror, I see her, the smile that favors a cheek, eyes slanting in the shape of small fish we eat for breakfast. Trees know best the now of things. What goes on has been going on for centuries. Washing dishes, I rest a foot on my standing leg. A fork clangs on the tile. I rinse a cracked cup. I try not to think of endings. So as far back as I can remember, my parents prayed the rosary together every night. During her last years, my mom could still recite the litany that went with the decades of the rosary. And it became a source of comfort for her. It helped her to fall asleep at night, especially when her language began to fail. I actually, this morning, I took this as a sign. I thought I had lost my mom's rosary. And I forgot that when we moved here from Florida, I had put it in this is a pim. Does anyone know what a pim is? So my father was very active in church, and he would use this to bring the host to people who were infirm and were at home and couldn't go to mass. So my sister said, you could have that, I could have it. And inside it was my mom's rosary. Yeah, and I had been looking for this for the past year and a half. So I thought I should read the poem about the rosary beads. If you notice, they're broken. And we have this, not really a superstition, but there's a saying in the Philippines that if you're going to bury your loved one with their rosary, you need to break the beads, because if you don't, someone might follow. We have all these superstitions about death and mourning. And I didn't break these beads, but when I found them, they were already broken. So it felt like a wish for life for me, a wish of hope. And it just felt really special that I found it this morning as I was preparing for the reading. So I will read Self-Portrait as Rosary Beads. Curled amid lint and loose change, tucked in a jacket's satin lining, or crushed with used gum in seams of denim, I've known pain clinics and airports, taxi cabs and stale schoolrooms where time is a honeycomb in winter. I am olive wood, carnelian, black onyx, plastic. I'm rosebuds pressed into fragrant spheres. Your heat is my musk, your worry, my fire. Pick your mystery. If Tuesday sorrowful, if Saturday glorious. I've held you in grocery lines, picket lines, the hours between sleepless and woken. Hold me. I am glass, shattered, smoothed by my mother's nerves, pillowed beneath her cheek. Counted, accountable, counting, counted on. Crystallized, dangled on a string or hung from a mirror in a river of traffic. Praying for green, for an end, for a mutiny of rain. Litany of sorrows, of praise, I'm a crown of roses, a crown of purple thorns. I am faithful as breadcrumbs on barbed wire. Lose me to birds or to night's shared thicket. Touch and be splintered, sundered, soothed, surrendered. My scent on your fingertips. That line came from the rosary from my mom is actually made of rose petals that have been sort of solidified into beads. Okay, so I think I'll read two more poems from the book and move to some newer work. So in many cultures, we use rituals and chants for healing, and poetry too, indeed, has been part of ancient medicine. So for me, there was something really healing about collecting some of these folk sayings and adages that my mom and her ancestors passed down through the generations. And although they made no sense in the logical world as we know it, there was a comfort to repeating this wisdom that seemed to follow another set of rules beyond those of the known world. And I think that that's some of where poetry comes from. If you go to bed hungry. If you go to bed hungry, your soul will get up and steal cold rice from the pot. Stop playing with fire before the moon rises, or you'll pee in your sleep. Sweeping the floor after dark sweeps wealth and good fortune out the door. Fork dropped, a gentleman will visit. Spoon, a bashful lady. Bathing after you've cooked over a hot stove makes the veins swell. For safe passage to the guest who leaves mid-meal, turn your plate. The adage goes, coffee stunts growth. 12 grapes on New Year's, the opposite. Advice from the learned, book under your pillow. Never step on, never drop. Every rice grain that remains on your plate, you'll meet again on the footpath to heaven. You'll have to stoop to pick up each one. So, yeah, my mother was a woman of contradictions. She was a medical doctor, so she had a science background, but she believed all these things. And when I published this poem, my cousins started calling me and they said, they started remembering more things. Like, do you remember the one about if you sleep with your hair wet, you'll wake up blind? Or I mean, some of them are really terrifying. I mean, some of these really were the cause of many childhood nightmares. So as I was telling the class earlier, my mother was the kind of person who you would want to sit next to at a dinner party because she told all the stories and she was so animated. She also played the piano. She loved to cook. And so when she gradually started to lose her memory, it kind of fell to me naturally to record her all the things that she used to tell us, her stories, her recipes, her favorite perfume, her catchphrases, her piano music. So I wrote this poem about maybe a few months into her Alzheimer's. It took me a while to find the final form though. And I say this because sometimes, it takes a while for a poem to reach the form that it will eventually live in. And I say this because I know there are a lot of students of poetry here, and I guess the message is to just be patient and to sometimes, put that poem away under your bed or in the drawer, like coffee. Sometimes it has to percolate for a while, and then look at it again with fresh eyes, maybe a few months later, and revise it with maybe kinder and more seeing eyes, because poetry is a way of seeing. So this next poem is dedicated to my mother. Her name was Carmen, and it's on page 5. I see you all flipping through the pages. Should make it easier for you and just say the page numbers. Sundowning for my mother, Carmen. The sweetest meat clings to the bone, my mother says, knifing her steak. Carmen, silver spade on my tongue. Mahjong nights, her mother and father gone, she cried herself to sleep. Blamed in the morning for her mother's losing hand. Unlucky tears. The sweetest meat, she begins at dinner, tearing off a drumstick. What will she recall by morning? Named for Our Lady of Mount Carmel, she pinned brown scapulars under our shirts, wet stamps that cleave to our backs. Carmen, prayer on the breath. Amid potted ferns, she works a jigsaw puzzle. Bizet on the radio. Unable to sleep, she made me lie next to her. My brothers clambered the banyan trees. My legs twitched, a broken clock. Her kisses are guava and rust. She sings kundimans her mother sang. Sampaguita, dahil sayo, saan ka man? Sunday morning, puzzle pieces strewn on yesterday's news. Maria Callas on the phonograph. Carmen. Citrine fire. When she plays the piano, the lovebirds fall silent. Alabaster eggs tremble in glass bowls. Afternoons, she woke with an urge to bite the brown loaf of my arm. The marks on my flesh faded by sundown. The sweetest meat clings, she insists, peels a mango. Amber rivers trace her elbows. A trail of L'air du Temps wafts in her wake. I follow it to her room, dab the scent on my wrists and throat. Evenings, she sang kundimans, hating gabi, nasaan ka irog, Carmen, song of the mangosteen moon. Before you go, I want to give you something. She hands me a thimble painted with a map of Cuba. We've never been to Cuba. In the dream, a sister pours rosary beads into her cupped hands. Upon waking, a dead wasp curled in her palm. So this next poem is a golden shovel, and I'm sure some of you know this form. It is a form that was created by the American poet Terence Hayes, in which he borrows a line from another poem in tribute usually, and that poem provides the ending word for each of the lines of the new poem. So if you read down the page on the right-hand side of the page, you'll be able to read that entire line that was borrowed. And for this poem, I borrowed from Yeats's the circus animal's desertion, which Yeats wrote towards the end of his life. Yet my poem uses this line as a ladder to go back to my early life as a young mother, a time of beginnings for me. And the line is from the famous ending of that poem. Now that my ladder's gone, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. So listen for those words. The foul rag and bone shop of the heart, a golden shovel using a line from William Butler Yeats. I'm not just talking about the sleepless days and nights, the nonstop nursing, the foul smelling diapers. I'm talking of how my body reeked, a soaked rag of curdled milk, drool, and leaky diapers, and how I'd wake already beat beyond blood, bone, and breath, the baby still at my breast. But when I pushed past the shop window the other day, I turned to do a double take, a glimmer of a woman I once knew. No, it wasn't just the wind-tossed hair, the morning weary face, but oh, the heart, the heart. So now I will turn to some newer work. I was thinking about what I should read, and since all this talk about loss, I've made it my mission now to just embrace that life is full of loss, and we don't need to apologize as poets for reading only poems and stories about loss, because sometimes we just need to hold the space for all that's been lost, and that's okay. This is a cento or a cento, as the Italians would say, and it is also a pantoum. A cento is an Italian form, as you know, that borrows lines from a secondary source, and a pantoum is a Malaysian form that uses lines in a braided kind of way, so that you'll hear each line twice, and it has a circular pattern where you'll hear the last two lines again from the beginning stanza, you'll hear them again at the end. Anyway, there's a lot of repetition. I can't explain it that well, but you'll see what I mean when I read it. I chose this form because, one, the pantoum mimics the circularity of grief. When we're grieving, when we're obsessed about the loss of a loved one, whether it be a parent or a lover or even a pet, our thoughts just keep circling back. And I thought this form suited that kind of obsessive circularity. This cento borrows from John Murillo, Uliaguez, and Yona Harvey. So each line is borrowed from one of their poems. The loss variations. Start with loss, lose everything, then lose it all again. Dust, algebra, fire. Like a high yellow sadness, this will be one weaning after another. Dust, algebra, fire. The slightest mistake could bring disaster. This will be one weaning after another, stained with rosaries and skeletons. The slightest mistake could bring disaster. A candle, a straight pin, a slave owner's sins, stained with rosaries and skeletons, curved in prayer or remembrance of hurt. A candle, a straight pin, a slave owner's sins. Please come closer. Take this from my hand, curved in prayer or remembrance of hurt. Any launch changes everything. Please come closer. Take this from my hand. I came here to live. Any launch changes everything. Pearl, pollen, salt. I came here to live. Dawn again. And this is what we wake to. Pearl, pollen, and salt. Enough gentleness and humor to go on. Dawn again. And this is what we wake to. A high yellow sadness. Enough gentleness and humor to go on. Start with loss. Lose everything. Then lose it all again. So about this time last year, I was recovering from a case of COVID-19. This was after being double vaxxed and boosted. It was the Delta strain, and it was rather serious. I had to be in quarantine for 10 days, as the recommendation was at the time, but it really went on for much longer than that. I guess I was one of what they call those long haulers. And one of the things that I realized was that even when you're confined to a room with a window overlooking your backyard, there's a lot of poetry that can be written when you're in your room for 24 hours a day. So I started writing these tanka. Tanka is a Japanese form that has 5 lines of varying lengths. Traditionally 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 is a syllabic count. But in the modern tanka, because English is so different from the language units of Japanese, it doesn't really matter if you don't follow that exactly. So the way this came about is I texted a friend on my first day of quarantine, and she's Japanese. She's one of the editors of RHINO, and she's a Japanese native who now lives here and writes in English. And I was being dramatic. I said, no one will visit me in my room tonight, only the full moon. And she said, that sounds like a tanka. You should write that into 575. And then she lineated it for me. I'm like, there's an idea. I can write tanka while I'm sitting here looking out at the moon. So anyway, I wanted to share this with you. What happened was a friend of mine and I decided to just exchange tanka every day. I would write her one. She's all the way in Florida. So she would send me something in California. By the time I woke up, 9 a.m., it's already noon in Florida. So she had a tanka for me, and then I would respond to it. And we went back and forth for about 30 days. So I wanted to share just my part of it, because I don't want to read like 30 tanka tonight. I think it's a little cruel. I'm only going to read 25. No kidding. 10. So I'll read just my part, and not Lucia's. All right. We called it Days of a Thousand Weathers. 1. Only the moon came over the hills, a good nurse in sensible shoes, my breath caught in the branches of my ribs. 2. One day I could finish sentences, the next. Today a gray dove struts on the fence, unfolds its note to the wind. 3. Milk white mist fringes the balcony, hands pressed to a chilled pane. To learn to speak quietly at such a distance to you. 4. You miss the daily things you can't do, held by doors or days. Little things, pruning roses, salting a stew, how the mailbox creaked open. 5. This bed of roses, the sea, a truck, ashes, soil, lettuce, nails, the wrong side of, to make ones, to raise the, to get into, with, climb out of, put it to. 6. Conjugating days as a hawk circles the plains, small mammals scurry for cover. The cactus flowers pink upturned faces, dreaming. 7. At noon, the red hawk preens on the steel tower, beak pointing west of the hills. I stir milk and tea, look up, and he's flown. 8. The lilies you sent open like letters perfumed, a cacophony of snowy trumpets. Wiping the table, amber dust falls. 9. Awoke to the verbs of unnameable ghost birds, studious minutes, emptying the dishwasher, black coffee dripping, faithful. 10. On the 9th day, rain. The hawk on the tower tucks beak to chest, almond speck in the storm's milky froth, a seed scheming its rebirth. How are you doing on time? How's everybody doing?
Good.
I was thinking I would just read one more poem. Okay, so I'll end with the last poem in the book. Unless there's some burning desire to hear any poems from the book that the audience members would like to request. But if not, I'll just read the last poem.
You know
Sure, which one?
The immigrant visits from Manila.
Oh,
I think
wow.
it just sounds so beautiful to hear you read that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about the backstory there. So my mom and dad were part of a group of Filipino medical students in the 60s who were given the a chance to come to the United States to finish their residency. Among the group of them that went, most of them stayed and worked in the United States, but my parents decided to come back. So they're like reverse immigrants. They wanted to come back and serve the country, et cetera. They wanted to stop the brain drain of all the smart, smart students going to the States, living there, working there, which also was, a legitimate choice given the conditions at the time. So my mom and dad were reverse immigrants. And when I moved to the States as a graduate student, my plan was to go back. My husband, not then boyfriend, is Filipino. We wanted to go back to the Philippines too, like my parents did. But during the time, it was the time of the People Power Revolution. It was the time of Marcos and his dictatorship. My parents actually told me, my mother told me, you know what, you should just stay there. And I know that was a big sacrifice for her because I know how much she wanted me to come home and to see me raise my children and be part of our family. But she made that ultimate sacrifice to say, you know what, you're better off staying there, raising your kids there. And so it was always bittersweet when I would go home to visit her, especially when she started to fall ill and lose her memory. So that's the backstory. The immigrant visits her mother. Those tropical mornings, I woke to no sun in a shuttered room. The shuffle of slippers at my door, hall light flooding the gap her slight frame could not fill, smaller than when I last saw her. Through the net of sleep floated her voice, repeating my name. I rose, stumbled to my feet, offered my arm. Her good leg leading, we made our way to the dim-lit table where I sliced a bagel neatly in half, fed it to the glowing toaster. When the rounds popped out, fragrant, golden, I spread the cream thin with a knife, layered the slivers of smoked salmon from the packet I carried from Chicago, a twist of lemon to finish. One bite and her eyes glazed over, forehead uncreased. For a moment, she was 26, a medical student again, lipsticked and bone-tired from her shift, sitting at a Brooklyn diner to coffee, a bagel, and the Times. Here, decades and hemispheres away, dawn burns through Manila smog, licks the blinds of the kitchen where my mother fills her mouth with the salt and sting of her first New York winter, the year before I was born. Right. Once again, thank you so much, Megan, for this lovely opportunity. Thank you for the warmth and the beautiful reception that you've all given me tonight and for listening to my poems. It's been a real pleasure and a gift to be here with all of you. Self-portrait as revision. I am the storm-torn palm frond draped on the balcony wall. I am the cumin in the soup, stirring the lentils sleep. I am the olive's skeletal pit, the cat's paw, the thistle spear, the clay in the kiln cast into a small flask to hold centuries of musk. For weeks I do not sing, though I gush, an underground rill carving blindly to the sea. I succumb to thunder, the urchin's sting, the softness of moss. This is my prayer. I am driftwood, parched in white heat, soaked in January rain, a seashell pressed to its pale grave. The wind rises, rewriting the hymnals of dunes. I am hurricaned, worn smooth again. Thank you.
So much.
Angela, and what a treat to get to hear some of the new Tonka series. I was saying that it's sort of, a VIP treatment that we get to hear the work before it even comes out. So once it starts winning all those awards, you could say we heard it first here. How about another round of applause? Collection, What Happens Is Neither, is for sale there in the back. So if you want to grab a copy, pay for it, but bring it on up, and I'm sure she'd be happy to sign it. Before we go, I hope to see y'all for our next reading next Wednesday, the 16th with Kevin Proofer. Thanks again for joining us for the Laurie Okuma Memorial Reading. Get home safely, y'all.